Is this beloved OSR adventure really as good as people say? Find out today on Runeforged. Hey folks, I'm William, this is Runeforged, welcome to the channel. Today we'll be taking a look at a very popular OSR adventure, the Black Wyrm of Brandonsford. As a heads up, I have not played or run this adventure, so this is really more of a first impressions video than anything else. And there probably will be at least minor spoilers in this video. So if you do think you're going to play through this adventure, maybe just stop this video now and maybe send this video to your GM. Okay, so what is the Black Wyrm of Brandonsford? Well, it's an old school compatible module for 4 to 8 characters of 1st to 3rd level, in which they visit the colorful inhabitants of Brandonsford, adventure through the fairy haunted woods outside of town, delve deep into 2 dungeon locations, and with any luck, hopefully slay a dragon. Technically, this was written for BX DnD, but I think you can get away with playing this in any OSR adjacent system. So if I played through this adventure, for example, I'll probably be using Shadowdark. And after having paged through it, I don't think I'm going to have too much trouble making that conversion. And if you'd like to pick up a copy for yourself, there should be a link to do so down in the video description. And if you're enjoying this video so far, please consider aiding me in my eternal struggle against the dreaded YouTube algorithm by crushing those like and subscribe buttons so you don't miss out on more exciting TTRPG content like this in the future. All right, so in terms of like setting and tone, the Black Wyrm of Brandonsford is very much a fairy tale adjacent adventure. There's quite a bit of an old school fairy tale vibe to it, with lots of whimsy. And I have to say, I am a big fan of this type of setting for an OSR game. And as many other creators have pointed out, I think that this module would work very well in a setting similar to Dolmenwood. For those of you who aren't familiar with Dolmenwood, I'll try to remember to put a link down in the description so you can learn more about that awesome fairy tale adjacent setting. There is pretty minimal art in this adventure, but I do have to say that what is here I do like quite a bit. So I am just going to click through some of the art here. Feel free to pause and peruse at your own leisure. There we've got the Goblin King, the Crypt of a Fallen Knight, and of course the titular Black Wyrm of Brandonsford. And of course, I would have loved to have seen more and fully colored art, but it is important to keep in mind this is an indie adventure. I think it was written by just one person, so pretty impressive, I think, given the scope of the adventure. The adventure does also come with a map of the area, and even though it is fairly simple and minimalistic, I really do like the way that it looks. Again, I do maybe wish there was a little bit of color added to it, and also I think it would have been nice to include a map without at least some of the labels on there, so that you could give it to the players kind of as a player-facing game aid. But of course, this is where the community comes to the rescue, and if you go online, you'll be able to see a wide variety of different variations of this map that will hopefully suit whatever need you might have for it. So here you can see a colorized version of the original map, and also with all of the location labels removed except for the town of Brandonsford itself. So I think this would be a really good game aid that you could give to your players during the course of the session and give them just a little bit of structure to their exploration. And there are also some dungeon maps that come with the adventure for the 2 main dungeons that are included. Again, they're fairly simple, minimalistic, but they do get the job done. I will say I do wish that there were more VTT-friendly versions of these maps available for the various different locations. And I will say that, I don't know about for the dungeons, but for some of the overland encounter areas, there are some more user-made maps that do look pretty good for that situation. So I'll try to make sure to include a link to those down in the video description if you are so inclined. Moving on to the introduction for the adventure, one thing this adventure does really well is it does a really good job of summarizing pretty much everything that the GM needs to know about the broad strokes of the adventure on a single page of information. Gives a little bit of information about what information you should be sharing with the party prior to the adventure, as well as a very cool little table of rumors, which is honestly pretty common in these OSR style adventures. Again, it breaks down the specifics of the background of the adventure for the GM in a series of, no more than 4 bullets, which is very exciting. And again, I think it does a really good job of breaking down exactly what the GM needs to know in a very small amount of space, which I really appreciate. And of course, it also suggests some adventure hooks for your party. Next, we have a breakdown of the town of Brandonsford, including several of the notable NPCs and locations within the town. And I have to say, I think this adventure does a really good job of creating a lot of flavor for these NPCs and also making sure that they are fairly interconnected. And I think in general, the adventure does a good job of kind of breadcrumbing players from one location to the next. And it actually looks like it would make it pretty easy to run. And there probably wouldn't be a lot of situations where your player just kind of gets stuck in certain areas, because it does feel like there's a very clear but non-enforced like path throughout the adventure that your characters can take if they are, following those breadcrumbs. And of course, it would not be an OSR adventure without a good random encounter table. So here you can see the random encounters for the woodland area of this adventure. I think there's also a separate one for the river or the stream that kind of runs through this area. And I have to say, I am a big fan of this random encounter table. It does feel fairly flavorful and interconnected, which is something that I really like to see. So when I say interconnected, for example, there are like a couple different encounters on here that are tied together. So one of the things you'll see on here for the number 8 entry here is the Golden Fox. And this is a shimmering golden fox-haired fox whose pelt is worth quite a bit of money if you're able to capture it, and worth even more if you're able to capture the creature without inflicting serious damage to the pelt itself, which even by itself I think is a pretty interesting encounter. But then you'll also see that there are a couple of other entries on this table where you see a group of pompous elven hunters, as well as their fey hounds, who are also searching for the golden fox. And there's some cool little interactions that might happen if you run into multiple of these different groups that are kind of involved in the same mission, the same quest. So I think that's very, very interesting. And of course, there is also an entry for the dragon itself. And I do also I think this kind of hints at it. It says the creatures of the forest flee in its wake. So this would be a good way of letting the characters know that this big nasty creature is coming, and not necessarily forcing an encounter with the dragon if they're not ready to take it on. And another thing I thought was interesting is not only is the dragon on this table, but also there's an entry for dragon signs. It says a trail of felled trees and acid burns cuts through the forest. So again, I really like this. It is telegraphing a future opponent and also giving you a little bit of information about the creature itself. So if there are felled trees, the characters are going to know this is a pretty large creature that did this. They might be able to ascertain that it was the dragon itself. And also they know this is not necessarily a fire-breathing dragon, but more of an acid-based dragon. So maybe that will give them some crucial information that they might need in order to combat the beast in the future. But again, I just really like this random encounter table. Very flavorful, very interconnected, and I think it really just plays into the setting for this adventure. So I think that's really good design. Next, the adventure goes on to detail several of the other adventure locations. And again, kind of in keeping with the feedback that I've given for the rest of the adventure, while it is relatively minimalistic and simplistic, I think it gives you everything that you need to run that encounter. And also, each of these encounters is very interesting and flavorful in a way that you don't always see with these types of adventures. And in typical OSR style, there are hints and these various different locations for ways that you could potentially get something that you want without necessarily having to fight for it. So you could go through this module with a very non-combat oriented approach and still be able to fulfill your mission objectives. So I think this is a nice way of rewarding clever players who aren't necessarily always looking to rush headfirst into combat, which again is a staple of OSR style of gameplay. Also, I want to point out, I think the adventure does a pretty good job of having multiple different ways throughout the world that the players might be able to gain some sort of advantage over the dragon, whether those be particular magic items that are particularly well suited to slaying a magical beast, or whether this is just information that can be granted by various different NPCs that may hint to some of the dragon's various different habits and weaknesses. And at the end, you can see the appendix here for some of the various different magical items that are included in the adventure. Now, I have to say that a lot of these are very interesting, much more interesting than your just standard +1 longsword, for example. So definitely feel free to pause and read them over at your own leisure if you'd like to see more about those. I will say that some of these are a little bit more ambiguous than I would prefer, although again, that very much comes with the territory of classic OSR. So one of these items is the Silver Axe of Sir Wilt, a bearded axe made entirely of polished silver. Leafy vines are embossed along the shaft. The axe cannot harm inert material like stone, wood, or metal, but cleaves through flesh and bone like butter, able to effortlessly slice off limbs upon making contact. Now, to be honest with you, I'm not really sure what I should be doing with this type of weapon as a GM. I would have preferred a little bit more information about what the mechanical impact of what this weapon is, in order for me to run it in a better way. But I do like the idea of this weapon. Again, I just want a little bit more information about what effect does this actually have when you're using this on an opponent. And the last thing that I wanted to highlight before I kind of give my overall thoughts on the adventure was I did want to point out that this is very much a classic OSR adventure in the fact that it is potentially quite deadly. So as you can see, somewhere in this adventure, there is a giant spider with a bite attack that is going to have you save versus poison or die in a single turn. You know, and again, I know this is like a classic OSRism, but this is a little bit too lethal for me for a low-level adventure. But having said that, this is a very simple fix if I'm aware that this is coming up in the adventure. So really not that big of a deal. All right, so what are my overall thoughts on the Black Wyrm of Brandonsford? So I actually think this is a pretty awesome little adventure. I can definitely see why it is so popular. And like a lot of the best OSR adventures, I think this really is a good showcase of doing a lot with very little. So the entire adventure actually comes in at only 18 pages, and less than that if you count like the non-essential pages. I think the author does a really good job of cramming a lot of fun and interesting things into a fairly small package. And I have to say that I think most of the things that I don't like about this adventure kind of boil down to just classic OSRisms that don't necessarily resonate with me personally. But I do find it really hard to fault the adventure for features that are relatively common in the genre. And I definitely think I'd be interested in running this adventure for myself at some point in the future. If you'd like to pick up a copy of the Black Wyrm of Brandonsford for yourself, there should be a link to do so down in the video description. And if you enjoyed this first impressions video, please consider checking out this next video, which should be popping up on your screen right about now. And finally, I want to hear from you. Have you run Black Wyrm of Brandonsford? If so, how did you find the adventure? And if you haven't run it, are you potentially interested in running it in the future? Definitely let me know down in the comment section of this video. But I think that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day. Bye.